My daughter's name is Addelyn Renee, and we lovingly nicknamed her Addy. So Addy or Addelyn Renee. Remember so clearly about her is she actually has my dark hair. Had my dark hair. I, throughout my pregnancy, expected her to come out with really light colored hair like my husband and I did as babies. He still has really lighter colored hair, and she came out with really, really dark hair. And that was not how I had pictured her pregnant, and it was such a surprise to see that.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a place where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter.
And I'm Lee. We are grateful you joined us today. Please note that this is a story of loss and has triggers.
Thanks to our lost parents who are willing to be vulnerable and share their children with us.
If you're listening to this podcast, just know that on our YouTube channel there are pictures and videos that are related to the stories that are being shared.
Subscribe and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us. Thank you again so much for joining us here today on Still a Part of Us. We are excited to talk to Jess, who's going to tell us a little bit more about her sweet daughter, Addy. And this is Still a Part of Us. And here we are talking about our babies and infant loss and stillbirth. So please keep yourself protected. Once again, thank you so much for being here today, Jess. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you and what do you do on a day-to-day basis? And where are you based out of?
Yes. I am an HR manager. I have been working in HR for 7 years. And at the time when Addy was, I was pregnant, when she was born, I was an HR manager, and still currently am. And during the time of my pregnancy and her birth, I was actually living in the Vancouver, Washington area. So right outside of the border of Portland. And then my husband and I recently relocated to Sacramento, California, in January of this year, actually. So she was born in Washington, in Portland area. And then now we are in California, which is where I grew up. So we came back home.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. And do you guys, and you say you refer to we, so is that you and your husband?
Yes. And now our 19-week-old golden retriever puppy, Kelso.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. And what do you guys like to do? Just like hobbies, things that you like to do on a regular basis and in your free time?
We are big advocates of getting outside as much as possible. So camping, hiking, especially during the last year of COVID, that was huge activities, anything outdoors we could get our hands on. We also really enjoy TV shows together. So, rewatching a lot of Gordon Ramsay shows.
Oh.
And yeah, so a lot of cooking shows and fun kind of like survivor shows, like, Wilderness, Naked and Afraid, anything where people are putting themselves in crazy situations and we're like, I could never do that.
I know those. I always freak out when I was like, oh, that's making me anxious. I'd be dead, I think.
Yeah. And then the last few months have just been really all about, we recently moved and we bought our first home and we got our first dog. So the last few months have been really just centered around, building our new home and getting it to where we want it to be and hanging out with our new puppy and being close to family finally for the first time in my adult life.
That's great. I think that's awesome. I think we're going to get a little bit more into your move as well. So I do want to touch on that in a little bit. So, and just a little bit of context for our listeners. Tell us, how long ago was Addy born?
Yeah. So she was born October 8th of 2020. And she passed away October 10th of 2020. And today, the day we're filming this, is exactly 6 months from the day that she passed away.
Yeah. So I think it was kind of fun to let's do this. Is a nice way to honor her. I really, really liked that we chose this day for you. So
me too. No, I cannot think of a better way to continue to put value to her life and to celebrate such a turbulent time and coming out on the other side of it and being able to look back at the last 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. So were you guys planning on getting pregnant then with Addy? Was that part of the whole grand scheme of things for your family?
Oh man, her pregnancy, it was so planned. It is not even, I mean, it was so planned to the month. at the time, my husband and I had so much going on. We're approaching 10 years together. We were approaching 6 years married. I always joked with him. I really wanted to be together with him 10 years and kind of live our young adult life. And then I really wanted to get a master's degree before we had children and started a family.
Mm-hmm.
So I got pregnant with her, or we found out April 1st, 2020. And we had been very meticulously planning, getting pregnant, doing the whole regimen 6 months prior to pregnancy and getting our bodies in good shape and good health. And I actually graduated with my master's in August of 2020. I was almost 6 months pregnant. So we had planned it to like, oh yes, I'll, get my, finish my degree while I'm, pregnant, and let's do it. And then we'll, be, in tandem with what our plans were. So yeah, she was very much, we set a month and we said, this is when it's happening. And we felt very lucky that it did. It happened almost immediately for us. And so
that is awesome.
Yeah.
That's impressive, Jess. It sounds like you guys are very like, we've got our stuff together.
I would absolutely say I am very much a planner. My husband is more, let's go with the flow. Let's see what life throws at us, which in this case, he was obviously very thankful that he's like, you planned this really well. I'm like, thank you.
Well, yes, I did plan that very well, didn't I?
Yeah, she was very much planned and very much wanted.
Oh, that is wonderful. So, and how did your pregnancy go? Was it fairly easy? I mean, you were 6, you graduated in August. So you were, I'm like, I'm just thinking, I'm like, oh, if I was pregnant while I was going to school, that would have been rough. So how was your pregnancy?
I knew what I was getting into towards the tail end of school. And of course we found out we were pregnant just as stay-at-home shelters were put into place. So she was actually conceived prior to kind of shelter in place happening. And we didn't really know how big COVID was going to get. So in my mind, I mean, there were so many other obstacles that happened in my pregnancy, but I felt very thankful. I was healthy. I had a very easygoing pregnancy. I think I experienced some, first trimester symptoms, a little bit of nausea, exhaustion, headaches, but nothing that, didn't stop me from working full time, because I worked full time, even though it was in remote capacity because of COVID. And I went to school full time, and that all became online. And I actually felt like I was so thankful, like, wow, COVID and what happened is it's still happening is awful, but I got to be pregnant at home. Basically, I'm like, I couldn't have planned this better. And this wasn't even my plan.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a silver lining, isn't it? It's kind of like, as awful as the pandemic has been, there's definitely some silver linings to that. So that's good. I'm glad to hear that your pregnancy wasn't too awful.
No, I was active. I went on walks almost every day, and I had no hiccups in my pregnancy whatsoever.
That's awesome. And so when you guys hit, like, how were your doctor's appointments? Were you looking good? Was Addy looking good?
Everything was, normal. And, my doctors, during COVID, I went to not everything alone. They let my husband in for a lot of big milestone appointments, but
that's good, because I know that there was a lot of people just that did this alone, and that is crummy. So I'm glad that he was there for some of those appointments. Great.
Yes, he got to be there for the anatomy scan. We actually had 2 anatomy scans, just because of some imaging that they could not see and then we were able to see. But outside of, no, every appointment was very normal. I was growing and gaining weight appropriately. She was growing and gaining what she needed to do. And I felt good. I loved being pregnant, and everyone just thought I'd just be beaming, and I loved it. It was one of the best times in my life.
Oh, that's so good to hear. You're one of those pregnancy unicorns. Did you know that? It sounds like.
It was just incredible. I couldn't have imagined when I had put this plan in forth for me and my husband and what our life looked like. I couldn't have imagined how wonderful it truly would be, right? You can't plan how incredible it's going to feel to have a baby kick inside you, or to be so empowered to finish. I remember giving my final speech for my master's program in front of a large audience on Zoom, which was not how it's supposed to be, but she was kicking inside me as I was giving this final, those are just things. It was incredible, and I loved every minute of it.
Oh, that's so great. That's so great. So you guys did go and do the anatomy scan at 20 weeks. It's not, at 20 weeks, probably around there. Did you guys plan on finding out if it was a girl or a boy?
Yes, we did. And we actually found out with the first genetic testing blood work she was 10 weeks at that point. So
Oh, okay.
we did all the genetic testing the first trimester, and we actually held the results until 4th of July weekend because we wanted to be surprised with my whole family. She was the first grandbaby across the whole board.
Are you
So
serious? Oh,
yeah. So my in-laws, and my dad, my mom has actually passed away. So my dad, like she was the first grandbaby in the whole family, and we wanted to be surprised together that she was a girl. I genuinely thought she was a boy. So when I found out at 17 weeks that it is a girl, I was shocked. I was like, this is no way. I always pictured her being a boy, and so yeah, we had the genetic testing done, blood work, and then we were able to find out a little bit earlier than the anatomy scan. But we actually had 2 anatomy scans, one at 18 weeks and one at 22 weeks.
oh, okay. And
Yep.
those looked good. And I was going to ask, did the genetic test, how did that look?
Fine. Everything was great. They didn't see any chromosomal issues. Everything looked good. And same with, the anatomy scans. We went for my first one at 18 weeks, and they were able to get good imaging, except for they wanted a little bit more of her brain and a
Hmm.
little bit of her heart. And she just would not position correctly. And it was not a big deal. They were like, she's really stubborn. So we're just going to come back in a couple weeks and we'll re-get those images. So we felt lucky because we're like, great, we get to see her twice. And almost a month later, we got to have basically a repeat, an hour with our baby, seeing her.
Yeah.
And they got, they got all the scans that they needed of her brain and her heart. And there was no concern after that. And that was at 22 weeks.
Okay. That's great. It's always kind of reassuring to have those kind of time points. And I love the fact that you guys were able to get to see her twice in a sense, right? I mean, you got to see her on the ultrasound, which is, I always think it's a special treat, actually. So, okay, so you're going along. You have defended your masters. I don't know if that's defended your masters, but you did your final presentation for your masters, and everything's going really well. Can you tell me a little bit more of what happened then?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of timeline, so I finished up my master's degree in August. I actually came back to California for my baby shower. We had a really small get together, but this is where my family is from. And we were able to make it happen even during COVID. And it was everyone, again, she was the first baby in the family. So everyone just really wanted to celebrate her. So at 28 weeks, I actually came home. At the time, we were building our house. And so we had purchased a house in early June after we found out we got pregnant. That kind of, it was a new build. So I actually was able to come in the house with my mother-in-law and my dad and my sister. And we looked at the house. It was, about halfway being built, and I'm, big and pregnant. And we got pictures of me in the front door that was incomplete. And it was so fun. So I had my baby shower in late September. And then I got home, and I pretty at that point, so I would say very late September to early October, I definitely started feeling pretty significant third trimester symptoms. I
Mm,
became really swollen, a lot of pelvic pressure, a lot of back pain. And at this point, I'd had no kind of concerns in my pregnancy. She wasn't moving as much as normal, which again, I know my doctor, she explained to me that, hey, things they move a little bit differently in the third trimester. They're a lot bigger. They're not going to have as much room. I'm 5'1". She's already like, you don't have a lot of capacity to begin with. So it
mhm.
wasn't in my mind a big concern, but a little bit of decreased fetal movement, just not as, jabby kicking, and still very active after eating. So she would still move around with sugar and things like that. But
Mhm,
yeah, I started just getting really swollen and tired even more.
mhm.
And I knew that was, in my mind at least, that's third trimester, right? Everyone says the third trimester, you get really tough, right? You're past that glowing second trimester and your body's preparing for the birth. So I just attributed all of those things to, I'm going into my third trimester. I remember trying to stretch at night, and every night my thighs were more and more swollen
Mm,
and I couldn't stretch as far. And I remember telling my husband, you know, getting really uncomfortable. So I had seen my OBGYN at 28 weeks, right after my baby shower.
okay. In
And
person.
then
Was it in
in
person?
person,
Okay.
yep, in person, I addressed the concerns of being a little bit more swollen. She actually had said that my belly was measuring a little bit bigger at that point,
Hmm.
but nothing that gave her concern. I mean, I absolutely, even at my baby shower, one of the things that's difficult for me to hear, but it's true is, some of my family and friends, and they said this out of complete love, is they're like, wow, you're growing really big for being 28 weeks. And I had been so normal sized. And I mean, I'm like, yeah, I mean, maybe she's just really growing and she's got long legs that we know of. And so I definitely was getting bigger very quickly, and it was not a normal speed, essentially. And I was getting uncomfortable. So my OBGYN, just said, look, at this point, I don't have any concerns. You're still walking. We're not seeing really any symptoms of potential concern for you at this point or her. So we'll just keep going through the program. And if things change, let me know. At that point, I started seeing my OBGYN. It was on a 2-week schedule. So I saw her again for a normal just a normal appointment. And that morning of my appointment, it was just a normal appointment. I remember feeling something was wrong, and I couldn't pinpoint it. And I did not think it was I didn't think it was extreme as it was. And what we found out was going on. I just figured something was a little off. The night before, she was moving, but not as much. And actually my husband and I took out our, Doppler, and we listened to her heart, and everything sounded fine. And she was moving, just not as much. And I couldn't pinpoint it. So I go into my OBGYN that morning, the morning she was born, which was October 8th, for a normal appointment. It was my about 30-week checkup. I was 30 weeks and 3 days at that point. And I just was feeling uncomfortable. I got on the scale and I had gained 22 pounds in 2 weeks. And I knew something was very, very wrong. And I was not one of those, for me, I did not weigh myself frequently when I was pregnant. I really wanted to let my body do its job. And my OBGYN agreed to that because I was not, I wasn't gaining weight at it was very normal, essentially. So she had no concerns with me just getting weight at my appointments. We didn't see a concern with that. So I knew something was very wrong at that point. And I knew I'd been feeling more uncomfortable and clothes weren't fitting like normal. And again, I just thought maybe third trimester, but she was okay. She was moving, her heartbeat was beating. So I got back into the exam room, and I just, at that point, lost it and just broke down. My OBGYN came in and said, that's a lot of weight to gain in a short period of time. It's obviously fluid. So we need to have a closer look at baby and you. So we got her on a stress test. And, I am so grateful. I actually recorded that thinking I'm going to go home tonight and be able to share this video with my family, because I did not know what was about to happen. I didn't know. And I got a video of me and my big belly and the stress test on, and I'm, listening to her heartbeat. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, she's okay. That's what mattered, right? She's okay. Her heart's beating, she's wiggling. But I still had that sense that something was wrong. So after the stress test, my OBGYN looked at the results, and, I could see her face looking at that piece of paper. And I knew I could sense something, was a little bit more serious than we thought. And she said to me, well, we're seeing some normal rhythm, but we're seeing quite a few, not normal rhythms. And listening back to the video, I hear it now. There was drops in her heartbeat. Yeah. And so we decided that it was time to get an ultrasound. So they decided to admit me into the OBGYN floor, or the birth center floor, which was on the 5th level of my hospital. And we had actually never been up there. It was like this kind of coveted, you only go up there when you're in labor, active labor. And it was a brand new floor. And I asked my OBGYN, should I call my husband? And she knew my husband, Patrick. And she's like, yes, you should call Patrick. And he was at work. And again, it had just been a normal appointment. I was used to doing that. And so I called Patrick and I said, you need to get over here. And I don't know how long we're going to be. So we met in the lobby and we went up to the 5th floor together, and I called my boss, and I had some scheduled interviews that day. And I just said, I'm so sorry. You need to take my calendar, and I don't know what today's going to look like. But I should be home tonight. I remember just thinking in my head, telling, my family and, my employer, I'm going to be home tonight. We'll talk about it then. We'll figure out what I missed. I'm so sorry, putting on the career woman part of me. Yeah. And so we went up to the 5th floor, we got admitted, and they immediately started me on some IVs, which I've never had an IV before. And it took like 6 or 7 pokes to get in different spots on my hands. And I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I mean, it's fine. This is the worst of today, which absolutely was not the worst of the day, of being poked at least. But I finally got a couple IVs in, and they started me on fluids. And then the ultrasound tech came in, and she spent probably, I would say, about 30 minutes on ultrasound. And it was very quiet. which had not been the previous experiences during my anatomy scans. She was just very quiet. And
Could
so
you see the ultrasound while she was doing it?
Somewhat. My husband remembers it perfectly. I actually think at this point I was starting to block out some of this. I knew something was wrong. I was getting that feeling. I remember looking at my husband more than the computer and the screen. I don't know. I didn't know what I was supposed to be looking for, but I knew something was wrong. And I guess the last ultrasound I'd had, she was 22 weeks and she was perfect, right? That was the last time I saw her.
Right.
And it was this joyous moment. And I just didn't want to take away from that. So I remember just almost trying to not look at the screen. And it was fully visible if we wanted to look at it. I didn't know what we were looking at. And then I remember at the end of the ultrasound, the tech said, "Hey, I want to show you guys something." And she was putting on, you could tell she was trying her very best to put on a smile for us. And she said, "I want to show you her spine and her legs and her arms." And, she just said, "I just really want you to look at this." And and at the time I didn't know. I'm like, okay, thanks. But I didn't realize she was trying to show us probably the last time we'd see her on the screen, at least in this form. And she was trying to make that part of it at least still somewhat positive, which I appreciate so much. And I'm so grateful she did that, because then I looked and there was my Addy and she was perfect, right? And I still, couldn't tell what was going on. I just saw, she was kind of moving and, I could feel her with the ultrasound. She didn't really like being probed and she would move around with it. And I'm like, okay. And so then at that point, everyone kind of left the room, and my husband actually called my sister, who is a nurse. She is not an OB. She doesn't work with an OBGYN directly. She knows, about the same thing that most nurses have during nursing school for, birthing and, care of infants. And my husband called her and just said, "Hey, like, this is what's going on." And I remember my sister saying, "If they give her magnesium, something is wrong, seriously. And you need to call me immediately." Because at that point, they'd just been giving me fluids. So if they give her magnesium, something is wrong. And so 2 minutes later, in comes a nurse with a magnesium shot. Oh. And I said, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Your doctor is going to come in and they're going to let you know." And I'm like, okay. And I didn't realize it, but magnesium at the time, magnesium is to help the baby's brain develop more quickly. And same with, they gave me a steroid shot as well. And that's supposed to help with their lungs for premature birth. So that's why my sister had said they're giving her magnesium. And I don't remember if she had said steroids, but she just said, then something is going to happen. Something's wrong. So my OBGYN about, 10 minutes later came in, and she sat on my bed and she took my hand, and she said, "Addy has something called hydrops." And I said, "What is that?" And she said, "There's quite a bit of fluid buildup inside of her. It's pretty significant. It's around her vital organs, including her lungs, her heart. It's around her brain." And she actually pulled up the ultrasound and showed us kind of the rim of her head specifically. I remember that. And she said, "There's about a 2 centimeter gap basically between where her skin line and her skull is." She said, "That's fluid. That's not supposed to be there." And I just remember being like, oh. And then she said the other thing, so Addy has hydrops. It's very severe. And we need to get her out. And I just said, "What?" I said, "She's 30 weeks. I just remember at this point, almost like going into that like fight or flight, like what? And, my OBGYN had 2 premature, beautiful baby boys. That's partly why we connected, and they were premature. And she had twins, and I really liked that about her. So that's why I chose her as my OBGYN. I just thought, you've got this experience. You're a mom of 2 boys that had twins. And she said, "My boys were born at 30 weeks. And she kept grabbing my hand and she started to cry," which I know as a doctor, she knew what was coming, and she knew she must have known at that point. But of course, my hospital, it was a small local hospital with not equipped to take care of a NICU baby in this capacity. So at that point, she said the other thing that's going on is that you have something called mirror syndrome, which happens to about 50% of cases with babies with hydrops. And it is when the mom is essentially getting sicker the baby gets. And she said, at this point, have you felt any type of like tightening in your belly over the last week? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, but I thought that was Braxton Hicks, right? I'm in my third trimester. That's normal, right? And she said, no, I think your body's been in labor for about a week and it's in complete distress right now. And you're dying if we don't get her out. Mirror syndrome is very serious. It's basically mimicking preeclampsia. And even though I didn't have some of the other preeclampsia symptoms like headache and, my blood pressure at this point was okay, I was getting incredibly swollen. And she said, we need to get her out. And they said, we can't perform care for her here. We're going to send you to basically OHSU, which is the major hospital in Portland.
Yeah.
They have a fantastic NICU unit. And we said, okay. And she's like, the ambulance is going to be here in 5 minutes to come get you. And you have to go. And I'm like, Patrick can't drive me. And she's like, no, you're in critical condition as well. I'm like, oh, okay. And I remember at that moment, looking at Patrick and I said, how long are we going to be there? I asked my doctor and she's like, I don't know. She didn't have a lot of answers. I asked if the baby for sure coming tonight. And she's like, I don't know. I asked if it would be C-section. She said, I don't know. So I looked at my husband and said, I just remember blurting off, like, we're going to need our pillows and I need you to feed the cat. And I need you to, pack me a couple of sweatpants. And, we didn't have our hospital bag together. I'm like, we're 30 weeks pregnant.
Exactly.
We didn't have our plan in place at this point for being such a planner.
So they were gonna were they basically gonna just transfer you there and then hand you over to, I'm assuming, maternal fetal medicine or basically the doctors there, the team of doctors at OHSU.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And they said at that point they're going to reassess me and Addy, and then they'll be able to put a plan of care for me together, based on what they also come up with and some of the resources that they had there. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So I remember, so after that, I had to pee, of course, because when you're, you pee all the time when you're pregnant.
All the
and so I
time.
went finally for the first time in this whole event and I finally had a minute to myself and my husband came in the bathroom and he was crying. I said, what's going on? I said, we're going to be okay. I said, this is not the plan, but, we're going to get her out. And it sounds like there's going to be a plan in place and we're going to care for her and we're going to the right place. And he said, I Googled hydrops, Jess, and it's not good. He said, we're going to need a miracle. And I think at that moment, I knew that this switched in my mind from, she's really sick and I'm really sick, but it's, we live in, 2020 and there's a lot of resources available to care for sick babies. And I realized that this was a lot bigger than just that. And then we got transferred to OHSU. They got me set up. My poor husband, he had to deal with multiple cars and his work and trying to manage getting the house together. And he did such a great job. And I'm over there getting examined some more. So they had their own team. So we had about a team of 6 people pretty immediately taking care of me and Addy. So doing more ultrasounds. They had the echocardiologist for her to take a look at her heart primarily and some of her other organs. They had 2 doctors at that point, and this it all happened so quick. They had 2 fetal medicine specialists come in and, after everything and say, at this point, I think you really have 3 options. And they said, it doesn't look good as of right now. So we need to move quickly. Option A is we can continue monitoring you and her. Things are moving very quickly and pretty significantly. And at that point, they were actually able to measure that like fluid buildup was increasing even inside me from the time I left, my normal local hospital to OHSU. They could already tell that more fluid is building up. So they're like, it's not getting any better, but we can continue to monitor. And they also, recommended at that point we would go in with oh my gosh, what are the needles called? It's blanking. With a
epidural.
Amniocentesis.
Oh, amniocentesis. I was like, I see what you're saying. Yes.
That's what the amniocentesis, yeah, to basically start draining her fluid,
Okay.
and some of the fluid surrounding her and in my stomach and around the placenta to try to provide some relief. They said, she's continuing to have buildup of fluid, so that would be a short-term fix. They also said we could induce you, and I was at that point just in active labor, but distress labor. So even though my body was in distress, there was no movement in terms of dilation or effacement. So it would be, let's induce her. And then we could get her out. But it could be, anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. They said your health is declining very quickly. So they said those are two options, but we don't recommend them. And I said, I understand why. They said she's going to pass away probably anyway tonight if we don't get her out. So they said the other option would be an emergency C-section. And they said that's what we would recommend. We could get you ready for surgery and get her out, and then you could begin your recovery and we could get you stabilized. And then we could assess her on the outside, because there was still limitations with, the scans, and, they at this point had suspected potentially something could have been wrong with some of her other organs. So her heart, they couldn't get a full visual, but while we got some scans, there was some concerns with her heart growth and her lung development. So they said at least we could assess her on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And it was without a question that that's what we needed to do. And I said, get me ready for surgery. And when I thought about getting pregnant, I absolutely knew that C-sections are a life-saving, surgery. And in my mind, I'm like, I just will never have that. Like, it just never crossed my mind, even though it was always a possibility. And I've never been any type in a major surgery before. And so I'm like, we're doing this. And, my husband is updating our family. I didn't even know where my cell phone was at this point. I hadn't looked at anything, which sounds so silly. Like in the moment, I just remember feeling so discombobulated and not oriented. And at this point, I hadn't eaten anything in the morning, because since my first cup of coffee that morning, because, my OBGYN kind of knew what was coming, and she's like, no more food, no more liquids.
Oh.
I mean, she probably anticipated a C-section. So I was hungry, and so all of those things. And I just didn't feel ready to meet my daughter. I was like, this is happening very quickly. It happened in a matter of 6 hours. And, she was born within 8 hours after my appointment. And so they prepped me for surgery. I went back, and I think a C-section, if it wasn't something that we were ready for mentally, it was something Patrick and we hadn't discussed or what that looked like. I don't even think he understood really what a C-section was. I mean, we were still finishing our birth classes, right? So so he didn't know, and he remembers very vividly, the sounds, and but we got her out, and I remember them holding her up in front of me and looking at her for the first time. She was perfect, but she was so sick. Her little ears, they were so swollen. And her little face, she looked like a newborn baby. She did not look like she was 30 weeks. Like she was, had 10 perfect toes and 10 perfect fingers. And, they told me she's a big kid, and we all kind of joked in my pregnancy she had longer legs, but she looked like a full-size baby because of all the fluid, right?
Yeah.
And they immediately took her away. And I remember Patrick asking me, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, go with her, like, go. And he said, okay. And he followed them into the NICU, and they started, I know she was breathing, but not very well. So they were doing some resuscitation with her. And then they were working on me. And I remember the doctor, the surgeon, she was so wonderful. After everything was done, and I was, of course, very loopy and disoriented and in shock, I was shaking, and she put the curtain down, and she's like, I want you to know I did, a standard bikini cut, basically. And I said, okay. She's like, it means that you're likely going to have healthy pregnancies and potential VBACs in the future. And I just remember her saying that, because this whole team of doctors, they all knew what was going to happen. They all knew, and they just were all trying to give me comfort in their own way. And I remember being so appreciative, saying, okay, thanks. Um, so yeah, that she was in the NICU, and they got me into the post-op room, and Patrick was able to come visit, and he, while I was still waking up from surgery and kind of getting myself oriented, he would be bouncing back and forth between the NICU room and coming to see me. And the next 26 hours, it's something, yeah, it was really difficult. It was having a lot of people coming in and out to check on me at that point. Thankfully, after I gave birth, I became more stabilized, because I think in this whole scheme of things, Addy was very sick, and we knew, I think at this point, there was a pretty well-rounded decision that she needed to get out and she was probably going to pass away, but we were at least going to give her a fighting chance.
Yeah.
And, based on statistics and the doctors, telling me it was, less than a 5% chance of how severe her hydrops was. And then if there was other concerns on top of that, which there was, that we found out as she was born and assessing her, it was just very, very slim. And even if it was any type of chance to get through these hurdles, her quality of life would be very, very poor. She would likely never be able to walk. We didn't know her brain functionality. I know she knew who I was. I got to meet her about 2 hours after she was born, officially meet her. She was in one of those little NICU beds with the heating lamps, and they took it all off for me to see her. And I remember putting my hand right next to her fingers. And at this point, she was not sedated. So they resuscitated her, but she was not sedated. So I was able to still, she was still wiggling a little bit. And I remember putting my finger right by her hand and saying, "Hi, Addy." And she just squeezed it. And it was the most magical moment. She knew exactly who I was. They spend how many months in your belly listening to you. And as an HR manager, I cannot even tell you how many phone interviews and conversations I would have, and over Zoom. And she was right there for it all. She was my little buddy through the quarantine, being alone and pregnant for the first time. I always had her. And so, so that was really the last time I saw her up until she passed away. There was some steps in place, which I have no ill will towards the hospital. They were incredible. I still am very close with some of the nurses who took care of me and were there for me. But I was so, trying to get through having a C-section, a major surgery. Yes. And, they wanted me to walk, and they needed me to go to the bathroom and things like that. And as soon as I could hit some of these milestones, I could go see her again. My husband was able to go see her as often as he wanted. So he'd often bounce back and forth. And then they moved us from, we were in the mother's quarters when we first got kind of wheeled into our room for the night. All I heard was the crying babies. And I said, "I can't be here." And they were able to move me. So I got this kind of private quarter in the hospital, so it was very quiet. And, that night it was just a lot of monitoring me, because I was trying to get stabilized, and Patrick going back and forth between visiting me and Addy, but she was breathing. At that point, they'd only put a couple chest tubes in. And so we just didn't know the extent of what else was going on, besides they were trying to drain fluid at this point. Okay. And then the next day, which was the 9th, the next morning, I woke up to my sister, who flew in. She lives in California, but she actually was on vacation in Boston at this point. So that was another whole, because again, she had planned everything, up until we thought her due date, really. And so she had planned this trip, and I woke up to my sister in the hospital room. And I just remember saying, "How are you here? We're in COVID.
How did they get you in here?"
And and my sister and I were very close. She's a year and a half younger than I am, which does not matter, but she's a little bit younger than me. And, our mom passed away 3 years ago, and we went through that together.
Yeah.
I actually live a mile away from her now. So we purposely bought our home, and
oh, that's great.
we live a mile away from each other, because we always imagined raising our children together and being so close. So, I woke up to my sister, and she was able to tell me that they made a hospital exception to let her in, and which is incredible.
Yeah.
And she actually had just gotten back from the NICU and she got to be with Addy. And they could only allow one person at a time. But she said, I've seen Patrick. I saw Addy. She's beautiful. She's perfect. And the next part of that day was spent with a lot of specialists coming into our room. Hey, I'm so-and-so. I am Addy's, cardiologist or different specialties. And we found out that she was very sick. Her heart was very sick as well, with something called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Essentially, her left heart chamber had stopped developing, and it wasn't detected at 22 weeks, which is incredible because that is something that's caught usually between 13 to 17 weeks is what the doctor explained. So normally it's that in itself is a terminating illness. You have to have heart transplants if the baby's healthy enough. And she obviously was very sick with hydrops. And even though how I kept trying to understand, as I said, so she's got these, and her lungs were underdeveloped. So I said, all these different things were happening. And I said, but they're different things. So it's not like one caused the other. It's not like a causation. And I just kept trying to ask those questions and understand. And they said, correct. So she has had a heart condition, likely since, conception, that was undetected. Her lungs then stopped really forming probably in the last, 3 to 5 weeks, because then she developed hydrops, and they're all kind of interrelated to just that she's sick, but it's not like one caused the other. And that was really hard for me. I remember just trying to understand because everything was so confusing, and I was so lost. And 8 hours prior and now the next day, she was healthy in my belly, and now it's not healthy anymore, and she's not well. And so, we had a lot of specialists coming in telling us different things. And essentially, we were at this point where she was making some very small improvements and then would take 10 steps back. And essentially they just said, look, we will continue giving her and you the best care possible until it's not appropriate anymore. And I said, okay. I said, my biggest thing is she can't suffer. I said, I'm her mom. Like, she can't suffer. And they agreed. And so I said, if I ask you kind of how is she, and be honest with me. And this was her doctor. He's amazing. And he said, I promise you I will. So it was 9:00 the night post-surgery. So this was the 9th of October. And at this point, still hadn't seen my cell phone. My sister's there, my husband's there. They're updating the family, which is all that mattered. I didn't realize all of my in-laws had drove into the hospital. They were all 5 hours away from us. They were all there, but they could not physically get in the hospital because of COVID. Yeah. So they're literally on the outskirts of the hospital, hanging out in parking lots and bringing, my husband and my sister food, and Jenny, my sister, Jen and Jess, my mom and dad were very creative. She would just, kind of go run and eat and then go check on me and go check on Addy. And it kind of became this like circle thing. And I, of course, could not go see Addy until I met those milestones. And when I did, it was amazing. It was about 9:00 at night, and I was able to go see her, and they wheeled me down, and she at this point was sedated. So she wasn't moving, and she still was, all toasty and that heat thing. And I remember saying, I need to stand up. And they're like, you just had surgery. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, I want to get as close as I can to my daughter because I don't know how much time I have left. So I stood up and I was able to talk to her. And I actually had a little cuddle lovey that they gave me, which I thought was very sweet, that they said, just, cuddle with this and we're going to give it to her so that she has your smell. And we did that. And so I gave her my cuddle little lovey. And at that point, then it was time to say goodnight. I was really tired. I needed some more medicine. I was in a lot of pain. And so they got me back up to the room. I got some medicine. My sister, Patrick, and I went to bed. And then at 12:26, they woke us up. The nurses came into my room and said, it's not well. Something's not going, it's not good. It's not well. It's not good. We need to get down to the NICU right away. And I just remember post-surgery flying out of my, my bed, and adrenaline is rushing, and they put me in a wheelchair and they wheeled me down right to the NICU. My sister had to stay outside, but they let Patrick and I in because they only allowed one person. And of course, in this instance, her doctor, who I am so grateful for, I looked at him in the eyes and I just knew. And he said I could put another chest tube in. And at this point it was 5 chest tubes. Oh. And I said, no. And my husband and I looked at each other. And I just remember saying, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. ready to say goodbye. But as a parent, and I'd waited. Oh, sorry, Winter. Okay. As a parent and being a first-time mom, she was my first baby. I could never let her suffer, and I knew she was suffering, and this was not giving her the life she deserved or the quality of life that she deserved. So we said, just stop, and they did. They took all her chest tubes out, and they were able to hand her first to me, and it was the first time I held her. She was so perfect. And the nurse had told me she weighed 5 pounds, 1 ounces. So I got to hold her. And then they handed her to my husband. And actually, that is the first baby he's ever held, which is very, very special. So she will always be the first baby he's ever held. And then the hospital, again, OHSU, incredible. They let my sister into the room. And my sister got to hold Addy while she was still alive. So the 3 of us, we got to be with her. It was incredibly peaceful. If you can imagine being in that turbulence and having that moment with her was just, it was my goodbye, but we got to hold her, and she passed away. Somewhere in between me and Patrick and I, she passed away, but she was pronounced deceased. She was pronounced dead in my arms. But we got to meet her. We got to hold her, and she passed away in our arms. So that was her birth. She's perfect.
Yeah.
And she has, it's amazing how life can change so quickly. 8 hours is, from the time her diagnosis to the time she was born. And of course, all of the aftermath following. But in those few moments with her, some people don't get that opportunity, and I did. And so I'm very, very lucky. And she was perfect.
Jess, can you tell me how you guys chose her name? Because it's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. So really, her first name is really fun story, actually.
Oh, is it?
I told you, we thought she was a boy. So we had all of these boy names lined up. We've been thinking of boy names really since, we first met. We never, my husband has brothers, and there's just a lot of boys in the family. So we just kind of assumed we'd have a boy. And so there's an app called Kinder, and it is a name app.
Oh.
Similar to Tinder,
yeah,
where you swipe left. It's exactly what it is. Swipe left for a name that you like, swipe right for a name you don't, and you match with your partner's phone. So if it's a name that you both matched on, So we, and I don't remember, I must have heard that from one of the mom apps or the mom, podcast I was listening to. And I'm like, this would be fun. So we were actually on our living room couch one night, and this was before we found out she was a girl. And the only name that we matched on that was for a girl was Addelyn.
Oh, really?
And so, the only name my husband and I matched on. So we're like, great. So if it's a girl, her name will be Addelyn. And it was so fun how we came up with that. Now, her middle name, Renee, is actually my mother-in-law's middle name. So it is a namesake for the family.
Right.
And my mother-in-law is one of the most important people in my life. And I could not think of anybody more deserving to have, a baby named after her. So that's where Addelyn Renee came in. So Addelyn was really fun. And then Addy, we just thought that was so cute. Oh. And, I could picture her so perfectly, little Addy, and her blonde pigtails is how I pictured them, running around and crazy, and because she was the only girl really and the first grandbaby, and so that was really exciting for everybody. Just it's a girl, and she's the first, and she would have been she would have been a little princess. I just imagined her like that, and getting anything she wanted. And my husband always said, oh, we're in trouble because, she's going to get whatever she wants. And that's how we came up with her name. And I love her name. Yeah. I love it.
It's so cute. And I just love the story behind it. That's so great.
So I know it's just this app. I'm like, geez. And so of course we still have all of our boy names. Don't have another girl name, but we have Addy.
That's good. That's good. Oh man, that's great. Tell me a little bit more about after Addie passed away, though. So you guys, she was in the NICU, and so I imagine, were you able to stay there for a little bit? What was kind of the policy? I don't know the policy at OHSU.
We were able to spend some time with her, and then they asked if we wanted to have, professional photography come in. They had a volunteer service, and we said absolutely. And they were able to actually capture some pictures, which are so treasured, of her little toes and her little feet, her hands and her fingerprints. And then she also, the photographer was able to capture some pictures of us holding her while she was still alive.
Oh.
And then after she had passed away, I don't know if I was in a state of shock necessarily, or just, I was still feeling all that pain. And I think at this point it was probably more emotional pain than physical. But they said, do you want to go back to the room for a little bit and we'll bring her to you? And I said, I would actually love that, to have her in an environment that's not so busy with the doctors and the nurses kind of standing around on just there. So my sister actually was able to stay with her while they dressed her. And they asked, if there was a specific outfit we had brought, which we didn't, even though I had the entire nursery set up and all of her clothes, they were all at home. I already had everything ready to go. But of course I didn't. My poor husband, when I told him, pack everything you can, he didn't pack that because we didn't know. And
Yeah,
so
of course.
they did have some nice options. So we were able to choose an outfit for her. And actually, my sister stayed and was able to change her diaper for the first time and dressed her. So her auntie had that privilege. I am so grateful. She was absolutely my sub-in while I was not myself and physically not doing well. And I was still recovering from Muir syndrome and all that. So then they were able to, about, I would say, an hour later, they got, the pictures of her hands and her feet. They got the prints. They were able to do a mold for me of her feet and her hands. So they did all that. And then they brought her to me. And then, surprise, the hospital made another exception. And my mother-in-law and my father-in-law, so my husband's mom and dad, they have been kind of on the outside of the hospital. They let them both in to meet Addie.
Oh,
so they got to both be with Addie. She had already passed, but my mother-in-law got to hold her and be with me to comfort me and Patrick. And that was a really difficult moment, of course, to be in that room with them, because she was the first grandbaby. I think we all, So, but we did get to spend some time together with her, and they really gave me unlimited amounts of time. And I don't remember how much time had passed. It was all just very, it held her and was with her. But at some point, it just felt like it was time to say goodbye to her body, because her soul was perfectly, perfect. And so they took her. They took her. At that point, they asked Patrick and I if this is okay, and we said yes. And then it was just Patrick and I, and pretty sure they gave me some really great sleeping meds because I was able to sleep a little bit. And then the next morning, they asked some of those logistical questions that you don't think about when you get pregnant. Like, so would you like to cremate your daughter, or do you want to have her buried? I think COVID posed an entirely new element to the conversation. Like, we might need to embalm her or preserve her. And those are just things that you don't want to hear as, a parent and going through this horrific experience. So OHSU is also a school for it's not a university, but it's a school study program. What is the phrase I'm looking for? Oh my word. They do a lot of medical teachings.
Yes.
Yeah. And so they asked if they could keep her organs actually for studying, because babies with hydrops is still pretty rare. And then to have all these other kind of things going on with her organs, they asked if they could preserve them to study them. And we said yes. We couldn't imagine a better place for her to hopefully help other future babies would be the idea, and continue to give value to her life.
That is, wow. Okay. That's so great.
So we consented to having them preserve her organs, and then we had the rest of her cremated. And I remember, just like during that period in the hospital, we'd try to make light of, oh, well, this is a less crappy thing that happened. And one of the less crappy things that happened was this incredible service, funeral service home. Anybody who lost a child, they would do all the services 100% free.
Oh,
so and I just remember thinking, like, wow, I didn't even think that was, people, when you're a parent and you're so devastated and you lost your baby, and to just have some type of like, wow, there's still good in this world is
Yeah.
how I felt at that moment, at least. So, we talked through the logistics of transportation, and they said they'll come pick her up, and this is where she's going to be, and she'll be safe here at the hospital. We'll move her there, and then you guys will go and sign paperwork with her there, and you can ask them whatever you need. They could do more prints for you guys, but it's typically about a week to 2 week turnaround until you get her ashes. I had all of my family there, so I wanted to be at that point admitted out of the hospital or discharged as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually only in the hospital for another day. And
Oh,
then they,
for
because I think,
C-section. Oh,
yeah, they let me go home. And I think it's partly, and also at that point, I'd made huge recovering strides with my Muir syndrome. I was
mhm.
losing fluid like crazy. In fact, in the month after her birth, I lost, I think, 60 pounds.
Oh,
Like all of it was fluid. Yeah.
oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, it was, so I was losing weight rapidly. All the fluids were coming out. And I think too, because my sister had been there and she was a nurse, and she ended up living with us for 3 weeks after Addy had passed. My mother-in-law was there. They felt comfortable discharging me. I had made all the right strides. After that, I just wanted to be home at that point, as difficult as I knew that going home would be to her things and
Yeah.
all of that without her. So I was able to get home and discharged as soon as possible. And, I think within a day or two, we went to the funeral home and we signed paperwork, and they did some more prints for us. And they didn't ask if we wanted to see her there. I wish I would have thought about that, because I know that some funeral homes allow you to go see your baby or family or loved one after they've deceased, but passed away. I wish I had asked maybe to see her. I would have liked to have seen her one more time, but I didn't. But they were incredibly kind. And my sister and I went online and we found this amazing place in Maine who did custom urns. And we were actually able to get her feet and hand next to her name on her urn. So it's actually her life size hand and footprint, which
Oh,
is incredible.
yeah.
And they were able to rush ship that so that way we could get it to the funeral home. And we were able to have her. And within a week we went and picked her up. And we actually, my dad, he offered to pay for things that needed to get paid for, which they were 100% free. But one thing we did buy is her colors. In my mind, like I said, she was a little princess, were pink and white. In my whole baby shower, and I am not the girly girl type. And so it was always this joke, like I had never worn pink in my life. And all of a sudden I have pink flowers around me, and, we're going to make a garden outside of our new house that is pink and white flowers only. And my dad actually bought this beautiful little metal flower that was pink. And we have some of her ashes stored in there as well. And that's a little bit more mobile and mobile, a little bit more mobile. It's a little bit more mobile. And we were able to donate her organs to be studied, and we decided to have her cremated. And we actually kept her in her safe box, and we did not take her out and actually have her here until we moved into our new home. So that was the first night we moved in. That was a big moment for all of us.
Yeah.
We took out the urn, and she was here with us. So
Yeah. Wow. So many. Had me. That was hard. I was like, I don't know how you guys did it. I don't know how you did it. I am sure that that was a very, I guess I kind of want to know how you were feeling after she passed away. I'm sure that there was some gratitude for being able to show her off to your family, since they were able to come in, which was so great. Um, but were you also I mean, like, I guess tell me how you're feeling after all of everything, because it just is a whirlwind sometimes, and it just like, how do I feel about all of this that just happened?
I was, I think, first just very numb. I tend to, when horrible things happen, and I tend to go into, I call it kind of automation mode. So I remember coming home and wanting to just clean my house and pack up her things and just, I don't know, feel some type of normalcy. So I was like numb and seeking normalcy. And then I became incredibly sad and actually very anxious. In the days following her passing, I had some incredibly severe anxiety attacks, which was the first time in my life I've ever suffered through anxiety. I remember, we were talking about vitamins, my sister and I, something so minuscule, and she had said, oh, too much potassium, could cause heart defects. And it was not that intent, but I immediately just had a panic attack. Like, what if I did this, right? What if that's what caused this? Or, I was cleaning the showers when I was pregnant once. And oh my gosh, what if that chemical caused this? Or even I was so careful, or that one glass of wine I had, a week before my 2-week waiting period, what if that caused this? And I just remember having a lot of feelings of, this is my fault. I caused this. And then having that sadness of, what if I did cause this? What if this was my fault? And it was all of this heartbreak and trauma in her life. It was my fault. So I remember being incredibly sad, and then moments of numbness, but a lot of anxiety in those few days following her passing, and even coming home, a lot of anxiety, which was not normal for me. So
That has got to be so, it is such a traumatic experience also just in general. So I can imagine the anxiety. Like I can relate to the anxiety on that.
it's a different type of anxiety, right? It's for me, like I said, I've had nervousness or, moments of anxiety before a job interview, or wow, looking back at a day, like that was a really bad day and feeling anxious about it. But this was like, wow, I had life inside me. And then it was just suddenly felt like my pregnancy was ripped from me. All of a sudden I was still feeling like the phantom kicks, right? So your body still is trying to adjust to not now being pregnant. And it was and then I think that anxiety morphed pretty quickly into anger. I had a lot of anger following her death, and just feeling different things at every moment, which was not normal for me as the planner who is structured, who has all these things in her life, just kind of meticulous. And, my whole house is in baskets normally. And then to have all these feelings that are all over the place and not being able to control them because you're just in such a traumatic state at that point.
Really
so
is.
that's how I was feeling post her death. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just so, it's devastating. Jess, tell me, I just want to hear a couple last things about Addy. And I want you to tell us something that you remember about her that you want to just share with people. Like, I kind of want to know a few more things, like how big was she and how long was she? You said she had dark hair when she was born, which was a surprise to you, which is so delightful. It's always like, oh, I didn't expect that. Tell me a little bit, last things that you want to tell us and remember about your Addy.
Yes, I would love to. So she was born 15 inches long, which at 30 weeks, we knew she had long legs. So that was, right in line with what we thought. So she was 15 inches long. She was born 5 pounds, 1 ounces, which a lot of that I know was maybe fluid, but, her little hands and her little toes were perfect. She had dark hair, just like me. And it was actually very thick. I'm like, wow, I can see she had a full head she was going to have a full head of hair. No wonder I had all that heartburn. And the only thing is that we did not get to see her eyes because they were so swollen when she was born. But my husband and I both have pretty blue eyes, and I can just imagine her blue eyes if we had been able to see them. Yeah.
And did you guys end up having an autopsy or anything outside?
We did.
You did. Okay. And anything conclusive in that? Were they able to kind of pinpoint any other things or in that report?
No, that's a great question. So we did have an autopsy, and they found nothing conclusive besides that she had hypoplastic left heart syndrome, which just an underdeveloped left heart chamber that, resulted in blood flow being improper, and the valves not closing. They also found that her lungs were underdeveloped. The hydrops was likely, again, a symptom, not a causation necessarily of one or the other. And it was non-immune hydrops. So the difference between immune hydrops is that's usually related to the mother and the baby's blood, which is pretty, meaning they're different, and it causes basically kind of
attack on the,
exactly, on the immune system of the baby. But that is pretty rare now because they test the mother and the baby's blood very early on. So she had non-immune hydrops. So essentially it could be a variety of different things, mostly related to some type of defect in the heart or major organ. But all of her chromosomes came back completely normal. So genetically there was nothing. We actually went and had further testing done. OHSU continued to advocate for Patrick and I, and us, of course, wanting to continue our journey to having a family. We had maxed out all of our insurance claims for the year. So we said, why not? Let's go get this crazy, $10,000 genetic test for the both of us might as well moving forward. And we actually had that done. And both of that came back that we were completely compatible. So there was no genetic potential abnormalities if we were to try to conceive again. And there was nothing that through those tests either that came back that they could see in Addy's genetic testing. And so everything was 100% fine with all of the tests. Her autopsy just showed things that we knew essentially led to her being so sick and passing away. They could not find a cause. So they said that this is, they can't explain why this happened. The only thing that they told me is that it likely happened at conception. And so whatever that looks like, and they're like, so you did nothing wrong. And that is so hard to hear because I almost wanted to just know, this caused this, and here we are today, right? And that's not her story. Yeah. We will never know what happened or why it happened. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Jess, it has been delightful hearing little Addy's story. I am so grateful that you were able to give voice to her and share her with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you again for everything that you do for this community, Winter, you and Lee. In a time of real sadness and feeling very alone, especially in COVID times, I found your podcast and I found a community of incredible parents who we all have a very different story, but it feels very nice to not be alone when you face something this horrid. So thank you for doing this and allowing me to be a part of that and hopefully reaching others the way that you've reached me in this time. So thank you.
You're welcome. It is our pleasure. It is our pleasure. I mean, as much as it stinks to be a part of this club, right? We're in it together.
Yes, we are.
Well, thank you again.